what is left to do? What sanctions are there that we have not brought against Russia yet?
Yeah, I mean, well, Joe, we could sanction Russia's nuclear fuel industry. So it's a little known fact that the United States purchases, I think, about 12% of the spent nuclear fuel that we need to keep our nuclear power industry going from Russia. The Europeans purchase about 17% of their nuclear fuel also from Russia to keep their nuclear power plants going. That is money that we should not be spending with Russia and in Russia. So that's kind of an easy one, I think, although, of course, you have to find alternative sources.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also just the question of whether any of these things work. If the end goal is changing the behavior of Vladimir Putin, what will change his behavior?
Yeah, I mean, my view, Kayla, is that it's not actually going to be the sanctions that are the final straw that changes Vladimir Putin's behavior. I think sanctions contribute to creating a situation where the Kremlin has access to less and less cash. And I would also like to see, for example, somehow, although it's tricky, sanctions on some of the dual use items that Russia's using to find components, basically to take components out of dishwashers and things of that nature, like chips, and they're putting them then into weapons. So if there's a way to, it's again trickier because you're sanctioning washing machines then, but you might be able to do it. But the end result is to put increasing pressure on the government, make it harder for them to find money to fuel their war economy. And therefore, if you put pressure also on the overall economy, you get the people to also exhibit discomfort with the war, which ultimately also helps us. Thus far, we've tried not to target the Russian people. I get it. But at the end of the day, the Kremlin needs to have restricted access to cash.
Well, it does feel like we're getting into the granular stuff here, Evelyn, and I wonder if it's time to start having an out loud conversation about secondary sanctions once again. Would that not be the next real level of enforcement here?
I think that's right, Joe. And specifically, I would put secondary sanctions on oil, purchasing oil from Russia, because we know that China, India, all of the countries that, frankly, in the past bought oil also from Iran until we clamped down on them with secondary sanctions. Those countries are purchasing cheap oil from Russia. But, you know, it might be cheap oil, but it's still money that's going into the Russian treasury. So I think secondary sanctions are a great idea.
There also is, of course, the ongoing question around providing aid to Russia's opponent, if you will, in this war, Ukraine. And we spoke about this with John Herbst, former ambassador to Ukraine and Uzbekistan, yesterday on this program. We asked him about what missteps he thought the Biden administration may have made in regard to that. Just take a listen to what he told us.
The administration has made two very serious mistakes that have contributed to the situation. The first is that they should have made the aid package proposal not in September of last year, but in March or April. And the second mistake has been a characteristic of the administrations since even before the Russian big invasion, which is the administration has been timid and slow in providing Ukraine the weapons.
So, Evelyn, in summary, it seems he feels that we have just been too slow, taken too long. But frankly, when we think about the forward view for aid for Ukraine, it may take a whole lot longer if indeed Congress passes it at all. How long is too long before it's too late?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. I think that the Ukrainians, obviously, we know that they had to pull back from Avdiivka because of the lack of ammunition. And so they're now really more in a defensive position, and they're having to secure their line, if you will, their military line of defense. The Ukrainians can hang in there, and they will hang in there, and they will fight, but at great human cost. And so it's up to us to, as quickly as possible, give them the basic ammunition, but also, frankly, the weapons that we have been withholding thus far. Because there's another element of this that my good friend Ambassador Herbst, maybe he mentioned, but it wasn't in that clip, which is that we should be providing longer range artillery, the ATACMS, with a longer range, for example, to Ukraine so that they can attack Russian military targets in Crimea. They can attack the Kerch Strait Bridge, which links Crimea with the Russian mainland and is used to transport military material. So there are things that we can do also, not just in providing additional assistance, but really good, game-changing, potentially, assistance.
Evelyn, it was months ago when we asked you about providing F-16s to Ukraine. At one point, it was a flat no, then a maybe, then it was yes. Are F-16s making their way to Ukraine, and will they make a difference?
F-16s are making their way. My understanding is that they're training pilots. There is a bit of a challenge because you have to come up with the necessary number of pilots. And of course, Ukraine can't spare. They can barely spare pilots from the ongoing fight. So that is a stressor for them. But I think they will take as many aircraft as they can get and put their pilots through the training. It is a mathematical question and a time question, so I'm not sure how much the F-16s will be a huge game changer. But if they can bring them onto the battlefield with an element of surprise, that could be useful.